Today we have an incredible guest with you, and as a special treat, she is the newest member of Fulfillment Therapy's team. Her name is Maddie Duval, and she speaks to us about a topic we have not yet discussed: infertility and miscarriage. If you have ever experienced the loneliness associated with these things, or you're currently experiencing this, you're not going to want to miss this episode. Stay tuned for some incredible insights from somebody experiencing these things right now. Hey parents, welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. Do you want to raise your kids better and have a stronger marriage? Are you up late at night researching marriage and parenting tools and self-care tips? Do you start each day hoping for deeper connections and less chaos, but it ends with family arguments and going 12 different directions again? My name's Kendra, wife, mom, therapist, and growth enthusiast. It wasn't until I discovered how to fulfill my unmet needs that I was finally able to show up as my best self as a spouse and parent. I realized that by meeting my needs, I could more fully meet the needs of my family with more energy and less resentment. In this podcast, I teach parents skills like boundary setting, prioritizing personal needs, communication, and claiming ownership. Just like my clients, you'll be shocked by the improvement in your marriage, parenting, and personal life when you focus on fulfilling your important unmet needs. Ready to prioritize yourself so you can quit mentally throat punching people? Then grab those earbuds and head outside, and let's walk and talk. Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today we have a guest, Maddie Duval, here speaking with us. And Maddie is the very first member of my team, my new team. So she's the team lead. And Maddie, have you been working with me for about a month now? Is that right?
Almost, yeah. It's crazy. I've been here almost a month.
I know, and it's been joyful. I was actually just thinking right before I got on here, like everybody, it's part of the human experience. Everybody experiences burnout, but I am in the thick of it. And I was just thinking, what would I have done without Maddie? We're about to get more interns, but I'm like, oh, without her, I would have been crying at this point. So thank you for being part of my team. And Maddie was one of those that said that she was interested in being a podcast guest. So this is the first time we're having somebody on our team as a guest, and we're going to have 4 other interns coming on in the next few days. But Maddie wanted to come and talk to us a little bit about infertility and miscarriages. And before we go into that, I just wanted to have you introduce yourself just a little bit to us, get to know you a little bit.
So I'm Maddie Duval. I'm currently in my graduate program for marriage and family therapy. I really hope to go into like sex therapy and marriage therapy. Love families.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the opportunity to work in that realm before, and it's just really sticky. Families are so hard to get everybody on the same page, and it's a little bit complicated. I mean, I think everything about therapy is pretty complicated at the end of the day because humans are so complicated, but that's why I lean a little bit more towards marriage, because I also believe that marriage is the foundation. And if you have a healthy, thriving marriage, then I feel like it's a lot easier to take care of the family then.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I'm so glad you were willing to come on and talk about that, especially because it's something we've addressed, but I keep going back and forth, especially because of the audience. Like some people really want like the deep nitty gritty, especially about intimacy and sex, and others, like there's such a wide range of what people are comfortable with. And I'm a little bit more of like, let's talk about all of it, because not talking about it is more of an issue generally. I mean, you can go the other way. So I'm so glad that is being talked about more. And it's something that I want to explore more on the podcast. So I'm glad that is a subject that you're also interested in. So maybe we'll have to have you on again at some point to talk about some of those things. But we're somewhat hitting it. Well, I guess not quite as much intimacy. Infertility,
Different.
miscarriage, maybe we'll sneak it in there a little bit today.
I'm open. I'm open for all the things. Open for all the things.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So you live in Utah and you said you're in your master's program and you are married. Is that correct?
Yes, my husband's finishing up his bachelor's at BYU. I graduated from BYU, and so we're just waiting for him to get done so that we can leave.
So we can leave. Yeah, we talked about the weather. That would be nice to go somewhere nice and sunny, maybe. Maybe you'll go to Wisconsin where it's not so sunny.
I mean, we're thinking more Washington, somewhere like twilight weather, from Stephanie Meyer's Twilight weather. So a little bit more rainy, but I
Yeah,
love
not
the
so
rain.
sunny.
So
that would definitely tick the boxes, that's for sure. Well,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about your interest in infertility and miscarriage, that topic. Like, give us some background for our audience.
In my undergrad at my university, I was able to work with one of the top MFT teachers that we have available. I chose not to go there because I wanted a little bit of variation in my education, but I still did value a lot of my teachers that I had. And his name is Dr. Jorgensen, Jeremy. Love him. He's amazing. But we were able to do a research project about miscarriage and infertility, and my partner and I chose to really focus our incoming data that we received on how that affects marital satisfaction. And that kind of is what really got me started down that road of being interested in it. And also through my own research with marriage and sex, a lot of the books I would read and a lot of the information that I'd go out to find from various doctors and therapists really got me interested in everything that it had to offer, because it is such a complex issue that a lot of women go through. And then these past couple of years I've been married to my husband, it's been something that we've struggled with. And then recently we lost one of ours. And so that brought out a whole new wave of emotions, and now I have a lot more personal ties to it. And so that got me even more involved in the community and the outreach, and how more research needs to be done into it, and also how much research is already available that can be helpful to people going through this.
Through infertility and miscarriage specifically?
Yes, yes.
So a lot of my clients, they really shut down. They pull away from people. They don't want to talk to people. But the fact that you're talking about community outreach, it sounds like you were sharing your story or talking about it more to people or getting help from others. Is that accurate?
In the beginning, I feel like most people, or at least for myself, we were pretty closed down about it. We were far enough along, and we'd been trying for a while, and so a lot of people, at least friends, were kind of aware, and so it was something that we talked about with them. But as for like the miscarriage and things, we hadn't really told a lot of people, and still a lot of people don't know, which is fine. But I was able to find some communities where I did feel comfortable telling my story, because I do feel like it's so personal, and with people that haven't gone through it, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, it's really hard talking to people about struggles that you're going through if they haven't been through it themselves. And in Provo, lovely Provo, we are surrounded by a lot of people that are very young, like us, and seem to just have kids. Like, they just make the decision that they want to have kids, or they get pregnant on their honeymoon night. We've had quite a few honeymoon babies that we know of, and it's really hard to bring up these harder topics when we know that, or at least it is very much presumed that not a lot of people around us would be able to relate. And that I don't really feel like that environment is exactly the best to kind of go raise awareness for it, when people can be like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. What else is going on with your life? Instead of people that would be like, oh my gosh, like, I've been through that too. Let's talk about it. So.
Right. So you feel like there, where it's a baby factory, it's a little bit harder to talk about it.
Oh, yes. It is. It is definitely like that down here. And obviously, like, we try to be aware going through what we've gone through, that not everyone's stories look like ours, and we know the statistics, but it's still really hard to live in that statistic when so many people around you are able to have children and move into that chapter of their lives seemingly very easily. Like we've put two and two together. Oh, you've been married this long and now you're pregnant. Like even if you have had this experience, there's not much time for it to have happened.
Yeah, it can be very lonely. I shared this in the very beginning of podcasting, but yeah, we struggled with infertility for several years and also two different miscarriages. And it is so much harder than you think until it's something that you've experienced, because at the time, you can't see the future. You don't know that it might be completely fine in 5 years, 6 years. Like, you don't know if you're going to live the rest of your life very isolated and not the way that you imagined, in particular when it comes to children. So it is something that, unless you've experienced it, is very hard to understand someone else's perspective. I did want to speak to one other thing really quickly about that. I imagine in that baby factory realm, I think the one thing that I've learned in counseling as a therapist is the more that people tell me their secret stories over and over and over, the more you realize we all feel alone, and there's more commonalities than we believe. So I suspect that there are a lot more people struggling with infertility or miscarriages than anybody has any idea. And sometimes it takes that one person. And I'm not even saying you have to go out there and do this. I'm just saying, like with every topic, there's usually so many more people hurting than you could ever imagine. I wanted to speak quickly to that lonely part. Why do you think infertility and miscarriage experiences are so lonely, especially in our society today where people talk about everything?
I still feel, especially for women, even though I know that in our world today there are various groups that also have children as well, that it's still kind of a matter of shame that comes with it, because I know through my own community that I've been a part of, and you were talking about like sharing my own story, my husband and I actually might have an opportunity in our church to actually teach a class about it, which we would be very excited to do, because we have heard that when we were going through it and talking to some people, they're like, oh yeah, like we know actually, there's actually a lot of people that are going through this, but no one talks about it. I feel like there is that degree of shame that surrounds it, especially I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We are taught from the time we can walk that part of a happy family is having two parents that are married, having children. And so I feel like anything that comes in the way of that is almost seen as like shameful. Like it's something that you're doing. And I feel like talking to people that aren't as sensitive about it will often point the finger at you as being the problem, or maybe there was something that you did to create this. And so I feel like that's kind of why, and even outside of our culture, with a lot of people freezing their eggs, like I still feel like so much pressure is put on the people that have the children, women or people that bear children, to be successful in doing that. And even with IVF, I don't see the guys being pumped up full of tons and tons of drugs every day, and their wives are the ones doing the shots, or their partners. And so I still feel like because so much it falls on women that's in childbearing people, that we really internalize it. And when something goes wrong, not saying that men don't, because my husband has had his own experience and I think his has actually been more lonely than mine. But I definitely feel like we carry around the shame that something's wrong with me, even though so many people around us can say, oh, nothing's wrong with you. It's your body that decided that it wasn't going to happen for whatever reason. Or maybe it wasn't even your body, but I still feel like a lot of women that I've reached out to and talked to, it very much feels like a betrayal. And then it's accompanied by that shame and embarrassment of telling people that you were pregnant, and all of a sudden now you're not anymore. Or if it's happened repeatedly and people are like excited for you, and then you're like, no, it's not exciting anymore. It's actually like really heartbreaking, and I don't necessarily want to talk about it. So yeah, I definitely feel like it's the shame and embarrassment that come with it that really prevent people from talking about it, even though, like you said, and what I've also observed, a lot of people do go through it.
Yeah. But it is such a complex and deep emotional space that it is hard to talk about. You're talking about shame. That's one of the hardest things for people to explore, and not just shame, but those other things that you mentioned, like body betrayal, that, well, you didn't specifically say this, but that deep sadness, or yeah, just so many layers that are really hard. Well, let's go to Brene Brown. I always think about her with vulnerability.
She's great.
I know, I love her. But it's so hard to be in that deeply vulnerable space when you're so raw and you feel so broken, and that self-betrayal, to just put that out there, unless it's somebody that's trusted. And I think it should be somebody trusted for the most part. But I can understand, because of those layers and how complex it is, why it is hard to speak to publicly. And again, in that area where you are, we're looking around you, it seems so easy for so many people. I remember that very clearly, how I had so many friends and family members that would plan the date that their babies would be born. And I'd be like, what? I'm just happy if I ever even get pregnant right now.
There's this wonderful woman, and she speaks to a lot of like miscarriage, and that's kind of her niche. Her name's Zoe Clark Coates, and she was talking about the agony of like waiting. You know, like you're waiting to have kids when everyone else around you is like planning the day. Like I know people that do that too. Or I had a friend, a very, very well-meaning friend who I love so much, but when we were talking about infertility struggles, she was like, yeah, we're going through the same thing. You know, a lot of people around us are having their second kids, and we don't know if that's right for us. And I'm like, yes, but it's a different experience, because when you are going through it, like you're waiting to get pregnant. You're waiting to see if your baby's going to stick around or not. And that is a different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've told this one other time too, but well-meaning people, and generally they really are well-meaning, but unless they've
Yes.
walked those steps, they can't really understand, even though they want to. But there was one time when I miscarried. I think it was my first miscarriage. Yeah, it was. And a well-meaning person in my church, and I still love her dearly. She said something to me like, do you think maybe you miscarried because you work out too much? And I just work out regularly, like,
Yeah.
5 days a week. That never crossed my mind. But the moment she said it, then I was filled with shame. Like, well, first frustration and sadness and hurt, and second with shame, like maybe this is my fault. And I think your mind naturally wants to go there. Like, we humans, fallible, imperfect humans, want to place blame there sometimes. Like, it's got to be somebody's fault. It doesn't really. That's not what I think. But we often want to go there. So, Maddie, through these experiences of both miscarriage and infertility, what would you have wanted to tell yourself or others before or even during these experiences that you've had?
I would say, and maybe you would agree with this, as much as I really love like online communities, I would have loved to tell myself that you'll be triggered by just random things. You'll be walking around, like, I'll just be having conversations with my friends, because a lot of my friends have kids, and I'll be talking with them, and we had a lovely couple, some of our friends over to our house, and they said that they were expecting. That's not the first pregnancy announcement I've heard in like the past couple months. It's really common, and I've been constantly surrounded by lots of pregnant people, which has become less and less triggering just because I'm surrounded by it so much. But for me and my husband, I was kind of hit by that, but my husband was like, I just wanted to just bawl. He's like, I was gonna have to excuse myself to go to the bathroom. He's like, I was so heartbroken that they're moving on to this chapter and we're not. Part of me wishes that I could also go back and tell myself that it's okay to not be okay. And viewing kids as another chapter in your life is maybe not the best way to think about it. I think they are a wonderful addition to your life, but I never think, I try to live by this, especially with traveling, that you don't have to wait for something to happen to start pursuing it. And so as much as children is something that we want, it's important to keep continuing down what we're already doing, the things that we're really passionate about and want to accomplish one day, and not say, oh, well, when we have kids, we'll do this. Just do it now. Because unfortunately, time doesn't stop for you. And I feel like in those moments, I was by myself when I was told that it was a miscarriage, and we actually lost our child 2 days before Christmas. But you want time to just stop. You want everybody and everything to just stop, but it doesn't. And so you have to figure out a way to keep going with everyone else around you. And I think creating those stopping points for yourself of, oh, when I have kids, we'll go do these things, is not going to help you to keep going. It's going to keep you kind of stuck in that mindset of, oh, well, everyone else is progressing, but I'm not. You're still progressing. It looks a little bit different, but that doesn't mean that you're not. You're just progressing in your own way. And not saying that you need to tell yourself, I love the comfort of knowing that God is there. But I definitely think hearing that, well, it's a part of God's plan is not my favorite thing to hear, especially from other people. But I think keeping it in mind that if hearing God's plan is triggering for you, then not using that, but rather thinking of it as, we're going to keep going and we're not going to wait for these moments to happen. We'll create them without putting qualifications on there, like children or a certain job or things like that.
I love that. I'm actually trying to write that down right now. We'll create moments without putting qualifications on them. So many of the things you said, Maddie, I'm going to read a few of those. You don't have to wait for something to happen. And then you said a few things, but then just do it now. Everyone else is progressing, but I'm not. And then you went on to say, you are, but in your own way. I think that can speak to a lot of listeners. Like, many of our listeners maybe are further along in their lives, depending on maybe they're not in college, but many of them maybe have either had those struggles or continue to have those challenges. And it is this lonely, dark place to be. And I think that's incredible insights that you have, that we create those moments and to keep living your life, even if it doesn't look like what you expected. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And just one last question for you. How do you keep moving forward from life's challenges right now? Because it sounds like you're still in the thick of a lot of this and navigating it daily. Like, how do you move forward?
I think finding those communities, sometimes they are very triggering to hear about other people's experiences, and it's really hard sometimes in some of those communities that I'm a part of, because what to expect is an app that you can get when you're pregnant, but it also can transition into trying to conceive and pregnancy loss after infertility and things, which is great. But sometimes they'll have ads for kids or whatever, or baby things. And I'm like, why is this here? Why is this here? These women are really struggling. Why is this here? Or sometimes it's hard because people will say, oh, yeah, I went through this, but then I had a kid really shortly after. And I'm like, that's not my experience. And a lot of other women who I go on those pages and they're like, yeah, that's also not my experience either. It's like really hard. And as I've reached out to someone and they'd be like, oh, well, when did you have a kid? And I'm like, I have my fur baby and I have a dead baby, and those are the two that I got right now. And so I think finding those groups is really important. I know on Instagram, I found a page, it's #miscarriage support, and there's just tons of posts about how to move forward. And sometimes they do kind of drag you down, which sometimes I don't like sitting in that sadness, because like you've spoken to before, it's really deep. And for me, there's a lot of things I don't talk about with miscarriage. Like, you can still have postpartum depression. You can still have these feelings, but I don't really feel like those resources are there to help you with them. I know that like suicide hotlines are wonderful people to talk to. I've had to talk to them a couple times, and they're great. And I really appreciate their support and the counseling support that they offer. And sometimes to keep moving forward, you have to go and find random things that will help you. Because unfortunately, like I was telling you before, my husband and I might have the opportunity to start a class actually for people in our ward to help both men and women going through miscarriage, because as hard as it is for me to find resources, we've found it's even harder for my husband to find them, and he still carries a lot of that weight. Although it's not physical, he carries a lot of the emotional weight that went with it. And I think just being open that unfortunately there's not going to be a lot of resources directly for you because of lack of education surrounding it, of community, of research. And so you might have to go to like a suicide hotline for one thing. You might have to go to some community support groups for infertility for some help, and then pregnancy loss support groups for other things. For me moving forward, I just tried to find lots of different avenues, because sometimes I'll go down one and some days it's triggering and some days it's not. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't just rely on this one thing. Like, I'm going to have to go to other things to find help there too. And that's okay. And it's unfortunate, but it's okay to allow yourself to not feel like you have to stay with something just because it was good for you for a time. Because maybe it's not good for you anymore. Like, maybe for me, like, I was talking to people that didn't understand it. I very quickly learned that was not for me. And so I started finding people, like, I have relatives that have been through it. So I started talking to them about it, but their experience is a little bit better. And so I'm like, well, I'll talk to them about some things, but not everything. I need to find another group that I can reach out to. That's what's been really helpful for me going forward. Finding fulfillment, even during these really hard times, is finding those groups of people who sometimes vary hour to hour, and that's okay.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, you've taught us a lot of beautiful insights in just this short little episode today. But if you were to leave us with one last mantra, even just maybe summing up everything that you've told us today, especially for those listeners that maybe have struggled with this or are still struggling in these challenges, what would you say to them?
There is a really great quote. It's by the same person I mentioned before. Her name is Zoe Clark Coates. She says, sometimes strength is not a choice. It's just something that you have to do. And sometimes, some days, it's really hard to do that. And when you're going through hard things, people often tell you how strong you are. But you don't always want to be strong. And you don't have to be. You can surround yourself with people that'll lift you up, or you can create those safe places for yourself where you don't have to be, and you can sit in your grief and recognize that it's okay if you don't feel strong. You just have to get through today, and that's it.
I love that. I think that's a perfect way to conclude this. You just have to survive today. You don't have to be this high performer, this high achiever, doing all the things. Maybe your 1%, your win for today is just moving through this day, just surviving this day, and that's okay. I think that's very beautifully said. Thank you for sharing those things with us. And your story, as vulnerable and as hard as it is, I know it's going to speak to a lot of people, because it's a hard thing to experience and it's a hard thing to talk about. Thank you again for sharing your story with us, Maddie.
Yeah, I hope that as lonely as I feel and other women feel, I've told my husband this, I'm like, if we can just help one person to not feel alone, then I know in our religion, we believe that Jesus will go after the one, and he uses us to go after the one. And so if we can just help one person not feel as alone, then it will have been worth it to go through this, so that somebody else doesn't have to feel the way we felt. And I try to focus on that sometimes.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, thank you again, Maddie, and thank you for being part of the team and letting our audience get to know you a little bit better, whoever the team that's behind the scenes and all the things that you guys are doing to make fulfillment therapy thrive. So it's wonderful to have you on. So as we end today, Maddie, as we're signing off, can you tell our listeners where to go to get help?
I know for Utah, the 998 suicide hotline is wonderful to talk to. And for me, I did have a lot of shame around it. But as I started talking to them about my experience, they were so helpful and very, very understanding people. They're great. What to expect. Sometimes the app might be a little bit triggering, and I recognize that. But if you're able to, you can go to the top, put it at trying to conceive, and you can go in communities and you can find a community for just about anything related to infertility or miscarriage or pregnancy after loss that you can imagine. The hashtag miscarriage support tag on Instagram is also really helpful. And then I'm working on eventually starting a podcast one of these days. And by the time this airs, it probably won't be up.
I was just going to say, just access the show notes and we'll put any updated information in there and you can find Maddie in all the places. So thank you for sharing those resources, and we will be sure to update that so people can find you in the future. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.